In 1997. The interface is ugly, the instructions are confusing, and you don't understand half the terminology, but you run the program against your neighbor's Wi-Fi network because the tutorial says to, and the password appears on your screen, and something fundamental shifts in your understanding of how the world works. The password was Jennifer1985. You didn't crack it through skill or intelligence. The tool did everything, probing the network for vulnerabilities that exist because most people don't know they exist, exploiting weaknesses that have been public knowledge for years but remain unpatched because nobody bothered. You just press buttons. But even pressing buttons produces a strange rush. You access something you weren't supposed to access. You bypassed a barrier that was supposed to keep you out. The locked door opened because you found a key that was just lying there, and the owner never knew you had it. Your friends think you're some kind of genius. You let them believe it because the truth is less impressive. You're a script kiddie, running tools you didn't write to exploit vulnerabilities you didn't discover. The real hackers, the ones who write the tools and find the holes, they would laugh at you. You're a tourist in their world, using their work without understanding it. But tourism can become residency. You start reading about how the tools actually work. Packet capture and network protocols, SQL injection and buffer overflows. The architecture of systems you've been attacking blindly. Each concept unlocks others, a cascade of understanding that reveals just how much you didn't know. You learn to code because coding is the boundary between using tools and building them. Python first, because everyone starts with Python. Then C, because understanding memory manipulation requires understanding memory. Then assembly, because assembly is where software meets hardware, and where the most powerful exploits live. The forums become your university. Anonymous handles teaching anonymous students. Knowledge shared freely because knowledge hoarded is knowledge lost. You ask questions that reveal your ignorance and receive answers that reduce it. The community is harsh to stupidity but generous to curiosity. Ask the same question twice and you're dismissed. Ask a good question once, and you'll get answers better than any textbook. Your first original exploit is embarrassingly simple. A web application that doesn't sanitize inputs, allowing SQL injection through a contact form. The vulnerability has existed for years on this particular site. You're not the first to find it, but you found it yourself through your own analysis, and that matters. The database dumps onto your screen in scrolling text. Usernames, email addresses, hash passwords that you immediately recognize as MD5, which means they're essentially unhashed to anyone with a rainbow table. Customer data, payment information, administrative credentials. The company trusted their developers, and their developers didn't know what they were doing. You don't do anything with the data. Not yet. The access itself is the achievement. You've crossed from consumer to producer, from user to creator. The tools you used before were written by people exactly like you, who started exactly where you started, who progressed through exactly the same learning curve. Now you're one of them. The late nights compound. You lose jobs because you can't focus on work that doesn't matter. You lose relationships because you can't explain what you're doing to people who wouldn't understand. The isolation feels like freedom. The obsession feels like purpose. Level 2, the freelancer. Money enters the equation, not through your own initiative, but through a message from someone who noticed your forum posts. A job offer, vaguely worded. Testing security for a company that may or may not have authorized the testing. The payment would be in cryptocurrency. The work would be pseudonymous. You're not stupid enough to say yes immediately, but you're not honest enough to say no. You research the client, which means researching through the tools you've learned, piecing together an identity from digital breadcrumbs. The company is real. The security concerns might be legitimate. The gray area is genuinely gray, rather than obviously illegal. You take the job. The target is a competitor's web infrastructure. You're supposed to find vulnerabilities and document them. Whether the documentation goes to the competitor for remediation or to the client for exploitation is not your concern. You're just a security researcher, technically. The work takes 3 weeks. You find 4 critical vulnerabilities that would allow account takeover, data exfiltration, and service disruption. You document them professionally, as if you were a legitimate penetration tester delivering a corporate report. You receive payment. Nobody is arrested. The money opens doors that passion alone couldn't open. Better equipment, better learning resources, time to focus instead of working jobs you hate. You take more freelance work, always careful, always pseudonymous, always maintaining plausible deniability. Security research, that's all it is. The rationalizations become smoother with practice. You're not hurting anyone, you're finding problems that would be found eventually anyway. The companies you target have lawyers and insurance. They'll survive. The people whose data you access are abstractions, usernames and databases rather than humans with lives. The money you earn is just compensation for skills that have market value. You develop a reputation under your handle, reliable work, clean documentation, professional communication. The jobs get more interesting and more lucrative. Cryptocurrency wallets accumulate balances that would be difficult to explain to tax authorities. You maintain separation between your online identity and your legal identity, layers of misdirection that feel increasingly natural. The operational security becomes second nature. VPNs chain through multiple jurisdictions, virtual machines that leave no traces on the host system, communication channels that encrypt everything and delete it automatically. You learn to think about surveillance before doing anything, anticipating how each action might be traced, planning escape routes before you need them. Your lifestyle adjusts to the new reality. No social media presence, no photographs that could enable facial recognition, no patterns that algorithms could detect and correlate. You become a ghost online, and increasingly a ghost offline, existing in the spaces between surveillance systems. Level 3, the specialist. You develop a focus. Every hacker eventually specializes because the field is too vast for generalization. Some choose web applications. Some choose network infrastructure. Some choose hardware reverse engineering chips and extracting firmware. You choose financial systems, banks and payment processors, and cryptocurrency exchanges. The targets with the most money and therefore the most security. Breaking into them requires understanding not just technology but regulation. Not just code, but compliance. The security teams are better funded and better trained than anything you faced as a script kiddie. Your first major financial intrusion takes 8 months of preparation. A mid-sized bank with online presence, not big enough to have world-class security, but big enough to have real money. You don't attack directly. You attack a third-party vendor that provides customer service software, compromising their network and then using that access to reach the bank's systems. The lateral movement through the bank's internal network is the closest thing you've experienced to a video game. Each system captured opens new possibilities. Each privilege escalated reveals new targets. You map the infrastructure slowly, carefully, avoiding detection while building understanding. The database with customer information. The transaction processing systems. The cold wallet with cryptocurrency reserves. You extract nothing. Not yet. The reconnaissance is its own product, information that has value to people who would pay for network maps and privilege chains in 0 days that haven't been patched. You sell the access to an intermediary who never tells you what happens next. The distance is deliberate. Whatever follows is not your problem, but the money from that sale is substantial. Life-changing, if you were willing to change your life visibly. You're not. The spending would attract attention, and attention is what you avoid. The cryptocurrency sits in wallets nested behind multiple layers of obfuscation, accumulating value while you continue living modestly. Your skills compound. Each intrusion teaches techniques applicable to future intrusions. The patterns repeat across institutions. Similar technologies, similar misconfigurations, similar human weaknesses. Social engineering works on bank employees the same as any other employees. Phishing works against security professionals, who should know better. The human vulnerabilities never patch. You develop a portfolio of techniques that work regardless of the specific target. Credential harvesting through phishing campaigns, sophisticated enough to fool security-conscious users. Privilege escalation chains that turn low-level access into administrative control. Persistence mechanisms that survive reboots and security scans, and even some re-imaging procedures. The financial sector's security, despite its reputation, proves surprisingly inconsistent. The big banks are hard, but they all depend on vendors who are easier. The payment processors are protected, but the merchants who use them are not. The cryptocurrency exchanges are built by developers who understand cryptography, but not operational security. Every chain has weak links, and finding weak links is what you do. Level 4, the organization. Working alone becomes limiting. The biggest targets require teams, coordinated operations too complex for any individual. You're recruited not into a gang, but into a network, loosely affiliated specialists who collaborate on specific jobs without ever meeting in person. Your role is initial access. Other specialists handle different phases: reconnaissance, persistence, privilege escalation, data exfiltration, monetization. The division of labor allows expertise to concentrate. You become the best at one thing rather than adequate at everything. The targets escalate. Fortune 500 companies with security operations centers staffed around the clock. Government contractors with classified data on unclassified networks. Critical infrastructure that controls things you don't want to think about. Power grids, water treatment, air traffic systems. You maintain the fiction that you're not interested in the final products of your work. you provide access. What happens after is someone else's business. The specialization is also moral separation, allowing you to focus on technical challenges without confronting their consequences. But the consequences exist. Anyway, ransomware deployed through access you provided encrypts hospital systems during a pandemic. Data stolen through your breach appears on forums, where it's used for fraud and harassment. The bank you compromised doesn't detect the intrusion until customer accounts are drained, and then the customers are the ones who suffer. The rationalization strain. You're not the one deploying ransomware. You're not the one stealing identities. You just open doors. What happens after is market dynamics, supply and demand, problems that exist regardless of your participation. You could stop. You have enough money to stop, but the work is addictive in ways that transcend money. The puzzle solving, the challenge, the proof of capability that each successful intrusion provides. You're good at something difficult, something most people can't comprehend, something that matters even if it matters in ways you'd rather not examine. Law enforcement awareness grows. Indictments appear against people you've worked with, the ones who weren't careful enough or weren't lucky enough. The risk calculus changes. Operations become fewer and larger, targeting payoffs that justify the increasing danger. You work with fewer people and trust them less. The paranoia becomes useful. You assume every new contact is a federal agent, until proven otherwise. You assume every operation is being watched until the money clears. You build exit strategies for exit strategies, fallback plans nested inside contingency plans. The mental load of maintaining perfect security grows heavier each year, but the alternative is prison. You watch the news with professional interest. Arrests that reveal how others got caught. Trials that expose techniques you could learn from. Sentences that remind you what happens to people who make mistakes you've been careful to avoid. The consequences are real for others. You remain convinced they won't be real for you. Level 5. The Ghost. The operation that ends everything begins as routine. A financial services company, similar to dozens you've targeted before, with infrastructure you understand, and vulnerabilities you can predict. Your team plans the intrusion carefully, mapping attack paths and staging tools, and coordinating timing across time zones. The access goes smoothly. Inside the network, you discover the usual sprawl of poorly segmented systems and poorly managed credentials. The path to the database is clear. The exfiltration begins without incident. But something changes. A trap you didn't expect. Honeypot data that looks valuable but exists only to track whoever takes it. Law enforcement has been watching this company, using it as bait, waiting for exactly the kind of intrusion you're conducting. You're inside a system that's inside a larger trap. The team scatters. Communication channels go dark. Everyone runs their own exit strategy. You execute procedures you've prepared for years but never used. Destroy the hardware. Burn the cryptographic keys. Move the cryptocurrency through tumblers so complex that tracing it would take years if it's traceable at all. Disappear from every identity that could connect to your activities. The legal name you carry has nothing connecting it to your handle. The firewalls between your identities held. You watch from a distance as others are arrested, indictments unsealed, operations exposed. Your name appears nowhere in the documents. You were careful enough, or lucky enough, or both. But the close call changes everything. Not morally, not suddenly, not through revelation, just practically. The risk isn't worth the reward anymore. The skills that made you valuable to criminal networks are the same skills that legitimate security needs. The transition is possible if you're willing to accept less money for less risk. You build a legitimate consulting practice under a new identity in a new country. The paperwork takes months. The backstory takes longer. You create a history that explains your skills without revealing their origin. Certifications obtained through legitimate study, employment references that exist because you created the companies that provide them. The clients are companies who want to know how they'd be attacked, hiring you to attack them first under contract. The work is the same work, just with permission and paperwork, and lawyers who ensure everything is documented and legal. The thrill is different, muted, but the intellectual challenge remains. You find yourself giving advice you ignored. When you needed it, patch your systems, train your employees, assume you'll be breached and plan for detection rather than prevention. The irony of teaching security to people who would arrest you if they knew your history isn't lost on you. The past lives in encrypted archives that you'll probably never access again. The cryptocurrency sits in cold storage, too dangerous to move, a retirement fund you may never be able to use. The skills remain sharp. Through legal application, breaking into systems that have authorized you to break into them, finding vulnerabilities that get patched rather than exploited. You read about the criminal operations that continue without you. New techniques, new targets, new generations of script kiddies becoming specialists, becoming organizational players. The ecosystem perpetuates itself regardless of any individual's participation. Some nights you think about the hospital systems that encrypted during the pandemic, the patients whose data was sold, the accounts that were drained from people who couldn't afford the loss, the human cost of the abstract work you did, but thinking changes nothing that already happened. The guilt can't undo the damage. All you can do is not create new damage, which isn't redemption, but might be something. The legitimate security work continues. You protect systems from people who are exactly like you used to be, who are motivated by the same things you were motivated by, who would make the same rationalizations if given the opportunity. You find them. You stop them. You document how they could have succeeded if you hadn't been there. Sometimes you recognize techniques you developed, exploits you wrote, attack patterns you perfected. The knowledge you created during your criminal years is now being used by the next generation, passed through forums the same way it was passed to you. You're fighting against your own legacy. The legitimate income is less than you earned illegally, but it comes without the paranoia. You sleep better. You travel without checking extradition treaties. You build relationships with people who know your real name, or at least the name you use now. The cryptocurrency fortune remains frozen, too risky to touch. Someday the techniques for tracing blockchain transactions will advance or decay, and you'll either be able to use the money, or you'll have to watch it become worthless. Either outcome is acceptable. The money was never the point. The irony isn't lost on you, but irony doesn't require resolution. You just keep working.